The next section now focuses on the question of the role and responsibilities of councillors, who leads and who manages. As we heard this morning from Philip Shanahan, who's posed the question, talked to Mark about the question, is that the council traditionally has been in charge of the strategy, and the operational side of things has been done by the administration of the CEO, but it's actually not legislated. And those overlap of those two areas does create some grey areas. And today we've got we're lucky to have the panellists who give of their time. I'll just go through those panellists, pose the question, see if there's another way forward, and then open it up to the audience as well. Councillor Michael Clarke, Councillor and former Mayor, Maribyrnong City Council. Councillor Clarke, thank you for taking the time to come along today. Mr John McLinden, CEO, Local Government Shire Council, up there from Melbourne. John, thank you for coming along. Jan Smith, Community Leader, Gurgari Community. Thank you for coming along today, Jan. Jill Evans, Community Services Director, Golden Plains Shire. Jill, thank you. And Jill's was a bit worried about getting here on time, so I think her train was running pretty late, so thanks, Jill. Made it in the end. Susan Benedyka, the Regional Development Company. Mark Hayes, Local Government Legal Advisory Specialist at Maddox. And Mark's been around for quite some time and seen a number of changes to the Act and has given advice to a number of councils over the years. So, we will start into the question as per the agenda, which is the role and responsibilities of councillors, who leads and who manages. Have you seen or encountered any grey areas? Around 5 minutes, if you'd like to address that question. Some of the people from the community leaders may not have a view on that, in which case you can pass that over to the next person, to the elected representative or to the officers from councils. But that's the question that I would like to ask. But in particular, Philip Shanahan this morning, Mark, posed us a question that he said we should ask of you, and that is that...
that was good of him, Gavin.
That's right, and it's easy for him, if he was on the other side of the world, probably laughing right this minute. To get your view and thoughts on the grey and blurred areas of roles and responsibilities of councillors and employees, as Philip mentioned, that the Local Government Act did not mandate responsibilities or activities between councillors and management activities in a defined, clear and precise way. So perhaps we can kick off with you, Mark, and that could set the tone for the rest of the panellists to give a thought to the question that was of you before.
Okay, I'm happy to start off, and in advance, apologies to those of you who may have heard me make this point before, because I've made it in some other forums. Don't look to the law for a clear articulation of the respective roles of elected members on the one hand and staff on the other. You will find absolutely no joy in the Local Government Act if you're searching for a description of what a councillor's role is and what the organisation arm's role is. My view is, and has for a long time been, that governance is less a legal concept and more of a cultural concept. It's all about localised understandings, protocols, arrangements and systems, and not something which is really the subject of great legislative treatment. You do find some inferences about the respective roles in the Act. If you look at section 94A, it certainly speaks about timely advice being given by the organisation or the administration. It assumes that decisions are being taken by councillors and is the responsibility for implementation resting with the organisation. So that gives you some sort of hint as to what's envisaged, but it ain't particularly clear. There has been much said, I think by way of law, L-O-R-E rather than law, L-O-W, about councillors having responsibility for strategy and policy and administration having responsibility for implementation and the day-to-day operations of the council. That might be a very laudable sentiment. People, I'm sure, will have different views in this room about whether that's right or not right. My simple point is you don't find much in the Local Government Act to support that, other than the inference I just mentioned. There is also, in another section, a reference to the CEO's responsibility for staff matters. Again, it's commonly been accepted to mean that the CEO is exclusively responsible for staff matters. I've never been entirely convinced it is as clear as that, although there's some material around the second reading speech that does lend some weight to that. But it's another example of how the local government could rely on its articulation of what these respective roles and responsibilities are. And it all comes back, I think, to these localised understandings, arrangements and protocols which are key to really at the end of the day for defining things in terms of who does what the lines of demarcation are, and what good governance in practice really translates into.
Thanks, Mark. Just on that point, if it's not as black and white as what some people would like to be, is there scope to pick up aspects of that in the code of conduct?
Look, I think there's some merit in describing somewhere, whether it be in the Act or whether it be in some other document, what each part of the council ought to be. Again, I'm unconvinced ultimately that words on a page, be it a statute or some other document, are really going to be the answer, because inevitably there is greyness. That's why lawyers make a living and encourage greyness rather than black and white situations. But inevitably there will be issues about what does that mean, and how far can a councillor go there, or can administration create this territory. I think in all the words in the world, there will still be areas of uncertainty, and the lines of demarcation will still ultimately be up for grabs.
Thank you, Mark. Susan Benedyka from the Regional Development Company. Susan.
Thank you. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of councils at the councillor and senior management level. And I would entirely agree with Mark that it's the conversations about the protocols, the understandings and the systems, to use Mark's words, that are the most important in defining how things are done in a particular local government area. And those conversations are incredibly important. Being able to have them in a meaningful way, to reduce an us and them feeling. As soon as there is an us feeling about councillors and a them feeling about staff, or vice versa, then there is real trouble. It's the ability to have the conversations about how are we going to work on strategy, how and where are we, and what is our role when it comes to engagement, what is our respective role when it comes to the principles against which we'll make decisions. And I'd like to take that a little bit further, that when there is clarity that the whole of the organisation, the elected organisation and the employed organisation, are working for the betterment and the good of the entire local government area, when that is held as a key principle, that starts to sort out some of the other issues. Then there are some principles that you can agree early on. How are we going to do things? What's our touchstone? What do we need to come back to? And then test our decisions against those agreements. Again, I suppose, like Mark, I have the privilege of coming in and doing this with people, and I would really highly recommend that somebody outside does come in to help you have those conversations. So it's not around the person and it's not around the emotions. It's around how do we get some guiding principles that we can come back to and use. I particularly delight in going back to a council a year later and helping them revisit those agreements so that they can then work through, has this worked for us or not worked for us? How do we keep refining these so that our daily practice actually meets our ideal practice? And that's a really great place to be.
Thank you, Susan. Jill.
Well, I think I'd like to perhaps talk a little bit differently about this topic, and that is that, well, I guess I'd like to think about it from the community's perspective, and I can only really talk about what's happened at Golden Plain Shire Council, and that is that our community has a fairly clear sense of the role that we would play in what we call community planning. So I'm talking about something quite different from community engagement, because community engagement is something that we do all the time. We're talking to people, we're listening to people, we're consulting, we're informing. But community planning is something quite different. And this is really requires a set of principles, a discipline that needs to be constantly reinforced with councillors, with officers, and with the community. And I guess that if I look at some of the things that have happened across Golden Plains Shire Council since 1998, when we started doing this, and sure, we sometimes don't do it right, and sometimes we make mistakes, but we feel that this is really the best possible way of a community, and a number of communities, in our case 22 communities, having a very clear idea about what they want, and they have a very clear way of informing both councillors and council officers. Somebody did mention recently that if it was just officers and councillors, we'd be very good at building the house, but the community turns it into a home. And we see that right across our shire. And I guess that it's very particular to Golden Plains because we've got very small towns. And we recognise the importance of people understanding the importance of place. So ours are very much geographic plans, but they are plans that inform officers regularly, and we have to keep working at that internally. Every month at a council meeting, a community comes to that meeting and talks about its community plan. So our councillors are held to account almost every month. So it's an interactive, I think it's a really human approach to developing that relationship between the community councillors and officers.
Thanks. Jill? Jill, just a quick one. In your activity at the council, in the eyes of the community, who leads? Is it the administration of the council, is it the CEO, or is it the elected representatives?
Well, I would say it's pretty clearly the elected representatives, but the communities take a strong leadership too, I'd say, because they understand, well, we've been doing it for a long time, so they understand that our community planning, the way we run it, it's external to council, so we do employ an external person to manage it. It's pretty clear that the community see that they're running a lot of it because some of the things that they're asking for are things that council can take responsibility for, but a lot is taken, responsibility is elsewhere, and our communities have become very good at working things out.
Fantastic, thank you. Jan Smith, community leader in Gary community.
I'm shifting over to where you live. I'm a firm believer that the only way forward for local government is through community planning. Without volunteers, we've got nothing. I've got an amazing community where I am. All I ask of council is that we create a partnership, not a parent-child relationship, and sometimes it gets lost in the interpretation. But as for the other stuff, I don't have an opinion. But I'm still shifting over your shire.
Jen, the Hines closure at Gary, 142 jobs lost to the region. How did that sort of affect?
Had that happened 5 or 6 years ago, we would have been devastated. But because community planning had been up and going and travelling so well that we've got a very engaged, vibrant community, the answer was, oh, that's not so good. Okay, what can our community do about benefiting from this to happen? We only had 12 residents work there, so we didn't have a huge impact employment. Regionally, it was a different kettle of fish. So our community was engaged enough to be able to go to Hines and negotiate a package whereby our community has got a future for the next 20 years. They are extremely generous to us because we had the vision to be planning for the community rather than sitting there crying for help. At no stage did we cry for help. We said, this is our vision, this is what we want to do, and they said, we're very happy to partner you with it. Had that happened early on when we started community planning, which has been going for 10 years, as I said, we'd have been thinking, oh, what the heck has happened here? But not anymore. We see life from a different view. We see that in partnershiping with communities that are committed to their own growth and welfare, that, you know, sky's absolutely the limit. When we first started the engagement process in Gary, what did we hope for? Well, we weren't all that sure when it first came to town, and we had short-term aspirations, which has developed a magnificent farmers market and a wonderful music festival and music events, which has put an income into our community. Therefore, we're independent of council in a lot of things we do. We can stand on our own 2 feet. And I think as councillors and council, you've got to be able to get into these small communities that I come from, 192 people, and be able to help them help themselves. And that's not by being a parent, that's by being in a partnership of equals. When we first started, if anyone had said that we would be raising this huge amount of money at the moment to develop a unique botanical gardens in Gugari, I'd have laughed for a fortnight, because that was just never in our vision. But in this gift that Heinz left us, we've got a housing development plan which will add to our community and safeguard our kindergarten and our school, and we've got a botanical gardens that will bring people to our community, because we now know the only way our community can survive is with tourism, with bringing people in. The market brings in 1,500 people a month. The music festival brings in thousands. We know what we can make out of tourism in our community. Therefore, that is why our focus has been on establishing a unique Australian garden in our community.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Jen. John McLinden, the CEO of the Loddonshire Council, on the question of who leads and who manages. And I noticed that the Loddonshire Mayor is here with us today. John, over to you.
Where's your contract, John?
Where's my contract? I've just been asked. That's another topic. I'm not confused, I can assure you, Gavin, but others may be at times. Look, I think in relation to this issue of role clarity and role confusion, it comes down to the relationship between the council and its community, the council and its CEO. And I'm going to mention 4 concepts here. Goodwill, mutual respect. Don't forget that we're here for service, we're all here to serve, and a focus on the community. And certainly in the councils I've worked in recent years, I think they're the 4 things that have held that relationship between the CEO and the council, and the councillors and the mayor, and the council and the community together. I'd have to say I am very surprised at times when I will take my 3rd level managers to a council meeting so that they can observe the machinery of government as it is in Loddonshire, and I'm actually dumbfounded at their lack of knowledge of what happens inside the council chamber. The average staff member, unless they are attending council meetings regularly, doesn't think about it. They've got a job and they're focused on it. So I don't think a lot of our staff spend too much time thinking about who leads and who manages. It just happens. And it happens if there's good relationships and there's harmony in those relationships, which really lends itself to a culture of good, strong leadership. Leadership by the Mayor. And Mark talked a little bit about the Local Government Act, and he'll be able to quote the section in a minute, but it makes it pretty clear that when a Mayor is in attendance at a meeting, he is to take precedence, or she is to take precedence at that meeting. Pretty clear indication to me that the Mayor is meant to lead and be the figurehead of the organisation, both in front of staff and in front of, particularly in front of the community. Just in the paper there was a little talk about should councillors stick to strategy and staff stick to operations. It's been my observation, not only at a local level but certainly at state and federal level, that successful politicians meet people at the level at which they want to be met. If you have someone whose pothole is important to them, and they, for all their life, and their father before them and their mother before, his mother before him, went to the man at the top, because that's where you get stuff done, councillors need to meet people and deal with those complaints. A successful councillor will have no trouble in opening a bridge in the morning, taking about 30 phone calls in the afternoon, shaking hands, kissing babies, dealing with pothole matters, and signing contracts and negotiating CEO's contracts, for example, all in the same day. They've got to be able to deal with all of that stuff and meet people at the level that they expect to be dealt with. In relation to community engagement, I think it's absolutely clear in my mind that it is expected of the community that they will have access to their councillors. they're not actually that concerned at times whether the councillors are burying themselves in strategy and the bigger picture. If the councillor can't meet me and talk about the condition of my road or my concern about the revenue for the sporting reserve, he's telling me he or she is doing a great job in strategising the municipality. Well, as far as I'm concerned, you can't even get my road graded, so I don't put much store in that. I think the council law needs to be at every level, and yeah, that probably does lead to some role confusion. If I come down to one message at the end, I really think role clarity versus harmony in an organisation. If you have goodwill on all parties' sides, if you have mutual respect, focus on the reason you're here, and that's service to your community, and focus on the community, then it's been my experience that role confusion is not that big a deal.
Thank you, John. So really it's about relationships, betterment and goodwill shown on behalf of all parties to clear up those grey areas and respect. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much. Councillor Michael Clarke has been a long-time resident in Footscray, has been a former mayor at Maribyrnong City Council, and getting back to John's comments, Michael, you've kissed a few babies in the past?
Hundreds
of babies.
Thousands. And I want to kiss a few more.
Over to you.
Thanks, Gav. Look, this is a critical question, but I think we can look at the detail and do that infinitum. The fundamental proposition that I think we've got to try and explore, and it's overarching here, is the notion of organisational culture. Organisational culture is going to be the key determinant that tells you how you will do what you will do. As a councillor, as a mayor, as a CEO, as a bureaucrat. And each organisation, and there are many, many represented here this afternoon, every organisation has a different culture. Best perhaps described as stars. They have their own brilliance, their own lustre, their own size. They're the same insofar as they're stars, insofar as they're councils, but after that, they're unique. What you're able to do in one council, or I'll put it this way, go the other. What you may not be able to do in one council might be seen as a boundary breach. You pick up the phone and you're going to make a phone call to a community organisation that has in what you know is a successful bid for a development, community development in your city. So you're going to pick up the phone and talk to these people. And that's a boundary breach. And if the CEO finds out, that CEO can either have a quiet word to you or it can be referred to the inspectorate. The next level is boundary violation. And this is treated a little differently. What's boundary violation? That's when the very same councillor picks up the phone, is going to speak to the unspecified organisation, and they're going to say, listen, would you be interested in doing a land swap? Completely outside the scope of authority, and that's a key term, councillors, bureaucrats in the audience this afternoon. Authority. What is my authority as a councillor? What is my authority as a bureaucrat? And they're different. Be very clear. What a councillor can do in terms of having a discussion, perhaps a bureaucrat can't do. A councillor may be able to advocate. A bureaucrat might have to look at the same situation in terms of it's black and it's white. And one of our roles really is managing the shades of grey. And that's the joy of being a councillor. Ours is not a simple mathematical formulaic approach to life. It is an art form. It is a degree of science because there are legislation that determine how we can do what we can do, as well as, most specifically, what we can do. In relation to community engagement, this is all about a partnership for me. Absolutely critical. It's a partnership where the councillors have to lead the discussion. They are ably supported by bureaucracy. But at the end of the day, whether we're talking about a council plan or anything else in terms of community building, whether it's capital or social capital, at the end of the day, it's down to the council and councillors.
Thank you, Michael. Ultimately, at the ballot box, the councillors get judged on their leadership. Thank you. I guess the question now is posed that in an ideal world, what would you have to eliminate some of those grey areas? Would you settle with relationships, betterment and goodwill shown on behalf of elected representatives and officers, or do we need to have some legislative change? Does it need to be regulated? Does it need to be defined? Is it a grey area on purpose? Mark, and then I'll come back to you, Michael, and then we'll open up the discussion.
I think, Gavin, I've already had a go at answering that. I don't think more legislation is really the answer. I think in many different ways we said the same thing on this panel. It is about relationships, the sort of localised understandings, the conversations at the beginning of the 4-year term, and of course the conversations throughout the journey of those 4 years. They are the important things, and I think they are far more critical and far more compelling than any suggestion that we somehow amend the Local Government Act or somehow build into codes of conduct more prescription as to what each arm of the council ought to do.
Thank you, Mark. Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Gav. My sense is that it's all about principles, and principles that are set by the council during each council term. But I think it's really important that we understand that principles are not enshrined in stone. They're just that, they're principles. They are a guide. Because we are not gods, sadly, what we do is subject to budgetary circumstances, the community's appetite for what our strategic intent might be. So the principle which is hard and fast, nay, enshrined in stone, is massaged around the edges and moved on. But it is all about fundamentally working in a direction to a common set of guidelines, a common approach to the problem.
Thank you. Susan Benedyka, I'll just come to you now. And you've actually been doing some work with the Top Teams program, which is helping a number of councils in relationships, specifically around the elections of last year, and how they work together, how councils work together as a collective, if you like. And you mentioned that you've revisited some key principles of some of the agreements. Did you wish to add anything onto that?
I wanted to add one of the other pressures that occurs for councillors and their council team employees is the lack of understanding and community expectations. I noticed in this last election, much more than I have in any other election, that there was almost a cynicism about local government elections. And it started to drive conversations about, let's get rid of the CEO, we'll elect people to, not have any rate rises. There was a whole undercurrent that was very, very strong, not understanding what the role of a local government elected official is, and not understanding the role of local government itself. And it was almost built on there's too much power within the management, and the management, the tail is wagging the dog. And I saw that right through that last election, and it gave some interesting results at different local government areas. But I also think it played out in the sort of rhetoric that was used by prospective councillors when they did not understand what their future role might be. And they were misleading and buying into that conversation as time went on. So there's got to be some circuit breaker in there. I heard with interest the last panel that said, where is the education? How do we have more engaged conversation with our community about the role of local government? And where is that part of those who want to put their hand up? At what point do they get educated really in what the role is or what the role may be and where its limitations are? So I just think that it's not just the conversations that occur between those parties when they get to sit around the table. It happens way before that when the community has unreal expectations and people who put up their hand for election believe they've got powers quite different to those that they will have when they sit around the table.
Thank you, Susan. So taking that to the next level, and the practical outcome from that commentary would be that councils possibly need to be proactive in having leadership courses in the lead up to council elections, or even long times before then, to perhaps unearth some civically minded people who could potentially stand. And is there a tension in there? Do you wish to do that, to have someone to challenge you as a councillor? How is that received? It's a double-edged sword.
I must say that I've had something put to me which I've mulled over now for about 3 years, and it actually still makes sense. And that is that anyone who puts their hand up to be an elected official must attend a compulsory program before they actually have their money accepted as a deposit. And that program leads them through the expectations, what fits and doesn't fit, and gives them some understanding. By showing the commitment to attend those briefings, at least, there's a chance of having a conversation and weeding out those who have no intention of abiding by the principles and the rules once they get there. It also means that those who come in naively get to have a bit of an understanding about what's going on. So I've been playing with that idea. It's probably going to get some reaction. People will say, well, I don't have to attend anything compulsory when I'm elected to other levels of government.
Right.
Why do I need to do it at local government?
That's right.
But we cannot afford to see, I've seen some major breakdowns in councils, and those major breakdowns cost time, money and future prosperity.
Excuse me, Gavin, can I just jump in there? The whole notion, and I think, again, this room would be able to attest, the whole notion of role clarity, and I know John's spoken about it, again, it's been spoken, I think, right across the board here by all of our panel, but role clarity is one of the things when it comes to the role of the councillor that intrigues me as to how poor the understanding is as to what the scope of authority is of a councillor by so many of the new councillors that come in. So many of the new councillors that come in, I've found, haven't even attended a council meeting. I mean, I don't know if that's the experience of other members of this panel or the experience or the scope of experience of others in this room, but it intrigued me as to how poorly understood the role was and how poorly understood as I say, the role boundary, the scope of authority of a councillor, what that boundary might be.